since I started mediating, I've become a better listener. I've become a better friend. I've become a better family member. And I've definitely become a better lawyer.
It's okay to do all of this work together, even if it's going to create conflict, because conflict is good, because it's going through the conflict that will help you come out the other end with something even better than what you could have asked for without having that conversation.
The Center for Understanding in Conflict welcomes you to The Other Chair, a monthly podcast exploring the dynamics of conflict and how to bring the human issues to the table. Together with our guests, we explore how the power of understanding each other can lead to better solutions for people on both sides of an issue. We will also share tips for managing your own mediation practice, approaching conflict in the professional world, and ways to apply our understanding-based model in your personal life. Hello to our listeners, and welcome to The Other Chair. In this episode, we explore how legal professionals in New York can integrate mediation into their practice, the path to becoming a mediator, including the required training and next steps for joining court rosters, and how mediation or conflict resolution techniques like looping and understanding the dynamic can enhance client relationships, improve litigation strategies, and support negotiations with opposing counsel. Our guests today are Antoinette Delruelle and Joy Rosenthal, bringing years of experience as mediators and attorneys in New York. They'll be sharing details about an upcoming opportunity to receive Part 146 approved mediation training through the Center for Understanding in Conflict, which has a 40-hour conflict resolution and matrimonial mediation training in June of 2025, which has been designed specifically for practitioners looking to deepen their skills and qualify for court rosters. So welcome, Antoinette and Joy, to The Other Chair.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, well, so glad to have you here. And it's unusual to start a podcast episode of The Other Chair talking about a training. So hopefully those who are listening have continued to listen. And we really wanted to do this because not only are Antoinette and Joy teaching parts of the 40-hour and matrimonial mediation training, they're also very much experts in their field when it comes to mediation and legal knowledge and understanding. And both of you practice in various ways in New York. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's right.
Great. Well, let's start with becoming a mediator in New York. And maybe, Antoinette, we can begin with you. Can you share your journey into mediation, especially as an attorney, and how you transitioned from representing, let's start with survivors of domestic violence to leading the mediation initiatives that you work with?
So, as you said, I was a litigator. I represented survivors of domestic violence for 18 years for a nonprofit organization called the New York Legal Assistance Group, mostly immigrants. All of my cases, practically all were, related to domestic violence. And I loved the work. I think it was incredibly important, fulfilling, helpful to the clients, obviously, and very interesting. However, after 18 years, I was a little burned out. Litigation is hard, but litigating with an opponent who is used to using coercive power, coercive control to try to control the victim is just exhausting. So I wanted to do something less stressful, but it wasn't just being burned out. I also thought I've always been fascinated by conflict, but I wanted to explore a different way of handling conflict. And I started a training. I did a training for collaborative law, which is actually, in fact, quite different from mediation. But since I was such an advocate at heart, I thought collaborative law would allow me to do something different than litigation, but I would still be an advocate, because in collaborative law, you represent your client. You just have four-way meetings and you try to collaborate to get an agreement and you agree not to go to court. So I took this training and I thought this was fantastic, but for various practical reasons, I couldn't really have a collaborative law project at my office. So I took a training for mediation and I loved it. And I had the really good fortune of having a very, very close friend, Eddie Wertheim, who was already a mediator, had been a mediator for a bunch of years, who had worked with me at NILAG, so who knew exactly my background, etc., who said, I will co-mediate your first case, so you don't have to do it on your own. And through word of mouth, I got a case in my office, and we co-mediated that case. And then, the rest is history.
So I have to ask, Antoinette, When you mention kind of the difference between litigation and mediation, and I think the inference I take away is that maybe it was a little less stressful, but is it really sitting in between two parties who are in a conflict or an extreme or high conflict? Is it really that much more relaxing? Or can you describe the differences between litigating a conflict versus mediating that was more approachable for you?
Yeah, I think that first of all, yes, in mediation, people can have a ton of conflict. And I don't want to say that, oh, mediation is for people who agree. No, I always say people who agree, they just need a kitchen table to write down their agreement. They don't need a mediator. So there can be a lot of conflict, but I will say that litigation, especially litigation on behalf of domestic violence, is its particular flavor of stressful in that there are crises nonstop. It is a very different kind of way to approach the conflict. And I think the mediation is, even with people who scream at each other, is much more suited to my personality and how I try to approach the world, which is with a lot of openness and transparency. And the court is not really about that. Court is about presenting the best truth for your clients and doing it within fairly strict procedures. And so that's where I'm saying how different it was. I think if I may have had a regular caseload of domestic violence and non-domestic violence cases, A, I might not have burned out as quickly, or B, I might have been as attracted to mediation. But I think the contrast between these two was pretty different.
Joy, what was your path like to becoming a mediator? I understand that your work is a little bit different and that you were working with children in foster care and with delinquency cases as an attorney. Can you talk more about the transition that you took?
I went to law school because I was working with teenagers and didn't realize how many legal problems or how involved they would be with the court system. And then when I got out of law school, I worked at legal aid representing children in foster care in the South Bronx Family Court, and met Antoinette there
Mm-hmm.
many years ago when she was litigating. And I loved working with the kids. And the thing that I noticed about the kids was that they were very loyal both to their real moms and to their foster moms. A lot of times, their foster moms were their grandparents or aunts or cousins or somebody that they had already known. And I was really struck by that sense of loyalty and forgiveness for whatever had happened that had landed them in foster care. Not always, but often. So I did that for a number of years, and then I moved to Brooklyn, and it was a long commute. So at that time, there was an opening to do delinquency cases, which are criminal cases for teenagers, still at legal aid. And I started litigating and doing criminal defense. And I was really not cut out for it. I got pretty good at cross examining, but I really didn't like it. I wasn't cut out for it. And the cases were often school fights. And I would say, like, we had school fights when I was growing up, but we didn't get arrested for them. And there was no clear perpetrator or victim. A lot of times the kids got in a fight and maybe one got hurt more than the other. But and I said, these cases really should be mediated because the kids also often started out as friends. And I went to my supervisor, and I'm laughing that Antoinette said that Ellie Wertheim was so influential in her becoming a mediator because she was with me too. I went to my boss and I said, could we ever think about mediating these cases instead of doing defense? And she said, no, but you should talk to my friend Ellie Wertheim, who I had worked with in the Bronx legal aid office. And Ellie told me that she was starting a divorce mediation practice at the time, and that would be one thing I could do to stay in family law and integrate mediation into it. So around that time, I also got burnt out. I had been representing kids for about 10 years and a little bit of representing parents during that time. And I took the basic mediation training from the local community dispute resolution center in Queens. And I got on the panel to mediate custody and visitation cases in family court. So I worked mostly in Brooklyn and Manhattan family court. And I just took as many cases as I could at that time. I was very familiar with family court. I'd worked there for 10 years. And I understood a lot of the problems the families were facing. And I had this child's point of view. And I wouldn't say that children are neutral, but like I said, children are loyal to both parents. And that was my approach to it. And then I took a collaborative training also, and I knew I needed to learn divorce law. I knew other aspects of family law, but I didn't know divorce. And the other students in the collaborative law class had been divorce lawyers. And I said, it's going to be, I have to learn divorce law, but I went to law school. I can do that. I have to learn about equitable distribution was the main thing, and how to deal with property. But they had to learn how to be neutral rather than being strong advocates. And I knew that that was going to be much harder. And so I thought that was interesting. And I've sort of been able to use that experience of working with kids and seeing things from a kid's point of view as the basis for my mediation approach.
I have to add also, as to Joy's point, is that I took a first mediation training and then I co-mediated my first case with Ellie, and I completely botched it. I mean, I can still remember how I botched it, which was I was so judgmental towards one of the parties, and I also really had no idea what I was doing. I was totally lost. And then I took this Center for Understanding Conflict training, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is what mediation is about. And it was like having a clear map for where to go. It's still, hard because it's the beginning, but it's at least there's a map and it can be taught. I thought you just were born a good mediator, but in fact, it really can be taught.
Conflict manifests itself in many ways in our personal lives, for professionals in the workplace and for practitioners who have made a career bringing together parties in conflict through mediation practice. Each month, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts live webinars with featured guests discussing best practices and sharing their experiences for tackling conflict using the understanding-based model. So, Antoinette, you mentioned that there is a roadmap that can be taught. And so that leads me to my next question, which is what does the path look like to becoming a mediator in New York? Or is there required training and credentialing steps? Or any guarantees that you'll be placed anywhere? And then in that same vein, in your experience, why did you feel that the center's understanding-based training was more ideal for you in that process?
In order to be on court rosters as a mediator, or in order to volunteer as a mediator in a community dispute resolution center, a CDRC, you need some credentialing, and that's a whole other system. And the point there is that, especially for the courts, they feel that if they're going to tell the public this person is on a panel that we have vetted, they want to look at our credentials. And this is where there's definitely more barriers to entry if you want to be on a court roster. And usually I would say people don't start out by being on court roster. They start out mediating and then they apply to be on court rosters. And as there's no guarantee you will be. And the courts have to think about many things when they admit people. They have to think, of course, about quality and what your experience, but also language access, diversity. They're looking at a bunch of things in order to determine who's going to be on the roster. Being on the court roster is not like a panacea where all of a sudden you're going to be having a deluge of cases. It is definitely helpful when you're trying to get cases to say that, the mediator, the court has vetted you and now you're on the roster, but it's not like they're sending you tons and tons of cases anyway. So the other way that people start mediating is through, like Joy said, through the CDRC, the Community Dispute Resolution Centers. And their process is take a training, take a practicum, and then maybe if we like you, if we think you're good enough, you can be one of our volunteer mediators. And then you mediate cases within the community, like Joy explained, for free. They're all volunteers except for a very, very small staff that administers the CDRC. I have actually, over the course of the now more than 10 years, when I started this mediation project at NILAG in 2014, I have also helped a bunch of people start their career the way that Ellie helped Joy and I. So what I do at NILAG is I mediate mostly divorces for people with low incomes, and I co-mediate all of my cases, and I co-mediate with a lot of people who have taken the CUC training. We speak the same language, we understand mediation the same way, so that works really well. And they volunteer for that co-mediation experience. I mediate with them, and then I debrief after every mediation. And if there are attorneys, they also agree to provide help in the future as a consulting attorney. So in mediation, the mediator cannot give legal advice since the mediator is neutral. So even though I'm a lawyer, when I'm a mediator, I can't give legal advice. So I pair parties in my mediation with consulting attorneys who give legal advice and review the agreement before the parties sign it. So I would say like there are a number of people I work with now, Michelle Minovi, who's going to be teaching as well. She co-mediated a case at NILAG with me a couple of years ago. And then when they've done that work, if at my office I receive a case where people have, they earn too much money, we can't help them because we help people for free if they have a low income, then I send them to people I've co-mediated with. And often these people then will start out where maybe they're not going to ask for the maximum fee possible because these are still people who are not super rich. They're just a little bit in between. They're not wealthy enough that they can pay, I don't know, $400 an hour for a mediation, but their income is not at the level where we can help them completely for free.
So let's move out of the traditional mediation space. Many legal professionals don't formally mediate cases. Is there any reason that you think that they should still develop mediation skills or take a training to be aware of these? And Joy, would you like to start us off by answering that one?
Learning to be a mediator really helps you listen very well, helps you focus on what the person is saying, what's important to them. A lot of people have studied books like Getting to Yes, which is kind of the basis of alternative dispute resolution. And that starts with the concept that just because you get what you want doesn't mean I don't get what I want also. And we can both get what we want and need. And that's something that's really kind of the basis of mediation, of helping people figure out exactly what it is that they want and need and what the other person wants, listen to what the other person wants and needs, and then see if you can come up with an agreement where both people can get what they want and need. That's really important, whether you're litigating or mediating. And I think it's a really good question. How does mediation help you be a better lawyer? It really does. There's no question. I mean, started since I started mediating, I've become a better listener. I've become a better friend. I've become a better family member. And I've definitely become a better lawyer. Because if I can propose a solution that helps you get what you're going to need, you're much more likely to help me get what I need.
You mentioned proposing a solution. I think that's a good segue into my next question, which is how the understanding-based approach to negotiation compares to the traditional adversarial system. And in this case, how you might guide parties in conflict towards a resolution, or maybe you just tell them what you think the ideal one is. Can you talk more about that, Joy?
In litigation, parties are exchanging proposals or will, for instance, if you're doing a prenuptial agreement, the usual way would be that one spouse goes to their lawyer, the lawyer drafts it, sends it to the other fiance or their lawyer, and then you work off of that agreement. When you mediate a prenuptial agreement, you bring both parties together, the two fiancés, right? And you say, okay, let's talk about the bank account or something, or let's talk about this or that. How are we going to deal with it? And that gives the parties an opportunity to talk about it, to discuss it together. And then the mediator would draft it or draft the terms of whatever was discussed and write it down, memorialize it. So one way, mediation, the parties are making the decisions. The parties are talking directly with each other, and the mediator's job is to guide the discussion, to keep it productive, to keep it focused, and to make sure that both people feel safe enough and have the space to be able to say what it is that they want and need. So that's the biggest difference. In litigation, one party is sort of saying, this is what I want, and working off of that. And the other, it's more like starting with a blank piece of paper and both parties deciding together, this is how do we want to structure our agreement.
Throughout the year, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts in-depth basic and advanced certificate programs designed to train you to become effective mediators and conflict resolution professionals centered in the understanding-based model. Our training programs have been the gold standard in alternative dispute resolution for 40 years and is popular within the legal community with human resource professionals, ombudsmen, and corporate workplace mediation clients.
In family law, I think that the statistics are 95% of cases end up with a settlement. They're not going to trial. So when people say, I'm a litigator, yes, you are mostly a negotiator. And so having mediated and knowing mediation and knowing looping and active listening and how to get into what's important to parties, and then from there, coming up with options that work for both parties, that is 100% applicable to negotiations. I also teach students in Brooklyn Law School, and I can tell you that they all are, when they take a lot of mediation courses and they use it in order to get hired in litigation, because I think that now people have recognized that being able to negotiate is super important, and mediation will help you with that. And I will also say that mediation skills help you in relations with your clients, for instance. Sometimes we have difficulties with our clients. We don't understand each other. We don't hear each other. And the looping can be hugely helpful in your relationship with your own clients or your boss or your friends, as Joy said. And then looping the dynamic. Very often in litigation, you have certain dynamic that starts to form between even client and the mediator. Some dependency or the client expects the lawyer to do everything, and then the lawyer can't do it, and because we're just lawyers, and then there's some bad blood starts to form. Okay, well, looping that dynamic, recognizing what is happening and being able to express that to the client in a way that they can hear it, that's hugely helpful for anyone, any type of lawyers. And in terms of how the CUC method can help, I think that this view of it's okay to do all of this work together, even if it's going to create conflict, because conflict is good, because it's going through the conflict that will help you come out the other end with something even better than what you could have asked for without having that conversation. And so I think that's also this view of how to mediate, which is very particular to the Center for Understanding Conflict, is going to help anyone who works with conflict.
Both of you have mentioned a bit about how these mediation or conflict resolution skills can show up in a matrimonial context, either prenups or family cases. Can we talk a little bit more, since the training that you're both going to be doing together is in matrimonial mediation? What are some of the nuances of that, or rules or guidelines that those who are interested in doing that kind of work might need to keep in mind, and what benefit would there be in training specifically for that?
Well, I think that first of all, we think, okay, the advanced matrimonial mediation training, people think, oh, this is advanced and it's matrimonial, so it must be for lawyer. It's actually almost not necessarily true in that a lot of therapists do mediation, but they don't know the law. So this could be really, really helpful to them because now they know how to mediate. As mediator, we're not giving legal advice anyway. I've talked about that before. But it is important to know what the rules are so that you don't help people mediate an agreement that actually can't pass muster in court because there are certain rules about child support, for instance, that the therapist doesn't know. So it's super helpful for people who don't know the law. And then for those who, like Joy, she used to work in family court, so she did certain types of cases, but she didn't do divorces. This is the training to take because now you're going to know the law and you can mediate divorce cases knowing the law about divorces. And then for people who are not within the family law area, then the first 3 days of the training, that could be hugely helpful to people who are in HR, for instance, or anyone who really would like to enhance their negotiation skills.
A lot of times when people are in conflict or in court with each other, they're people who are not necessarily going to continue to know each other, are not going to necessarily continue to relate to each other. So if you have something like a small claims court or even a landlord-tenant where the tenants moved out, these are people who are not going to continue to have a relationship with each other. But in family situations and in divorce, usually they are. And they are going to continue to be in relation to each other and they're going to have to continue to work together. So mediation there and learning how to resolve conflict is really important.
So now let's take on the question of the role of consulting attorneys. And I think it's interesting to speak to both of you because you've both been active attorneys at one point or still are. And let's talk about the mindset shift between being an advocate and being a neutral, truly being a neutral. And I'll say that I was recently at our 40-hour training in California. And it was very interesting to see the programming that the attorneys had obviously adopted over many years of their training and professional life coming into a challenge with this approach. And so maybe both of you could take a moment to speak on what was that mental change like for you? And then how have you seen attorneys who are still consulting their clients in the background react to that approach?
Well, I think that the shift in how you approach a case from litigating to being a consulting attorney to a party who's in mediation is that you have to look at whatever conflict they have from the point of view of your client. Of course, this is your primary responsibility, is give your best advice to the client, but also from the point of view of the other party. And that is a paradigm shift because in litigation, we're not doing that. But the beauty of it is that I think that we can give better legal advice to our client when we really know more about the other side. So it is difficult in the beginning, but I think ultimately it benefits your own client.
When I start a mediation, I ask people why they're there. Why did they choose mediation? And they almost always say, because I want less conflict, because we get along and we want to continue to get along, because we think it's better for the kids. And when they're in conflict later, I go back and remind them why they chose mediation, right? And it's the same thing when we start mediation, I suggest that they go to a mediation-friendly reviewing attorney. And the reason I say mediation-friendly attorney is because of exactly what you're getting at, James. I just came from a mediation that I mediated, and it's a woman and a man. The woman went to a non-mediation friendly reviewing attorney and then came back saying, I want full custody and I should get full custody. And I explained to her that in mediation, like, did you think that he was going to agree to it? In mediation, one nobody will ever agree to full custody, the other party having full custody. And so it really is a mindset shift. And I think one of the things that CUC does a beautiful job of teaching is how to hold the mindset of each of the parties at the same time, and to allow for the possibility that one party saying the sky is gray and to them it looks gray, and the other party saying the sky is blue and to them it really looks blue. And you don't have to get to the truth of whether the sky is gray or blue. You just have to accept the fact that both things are true for each of them, that they see things differently.
And how do you approach that paradigm as an attorney or a former attorney with an ingrained win or lose mindset? I mean, you're legally required to do everything you can to help one party as an attorney. So once you take the mediator seat, and I've seen that it's easier, I think, to hear these things and to logically, oh, that makes sense. But once you're there, how do you truly keep yourself neutral? And what tools have you found help you to hold those two worldviews at once and not lean one way or the other?
Well, remember that I started off representing children, and that was the first thing I said, was that children are loyal to both parents. So I had to learn it then. And it's true that I have litigated and I have had to protect the victim. And in that case, you really have this huge responsibility. But my mindset has always, I've talked about both and from the beginning. And so that's the thing that I was saying before, that when I walked into the training the first time and I said, I have to learn divorce law, but they have to learn how to be neutral. And that's going to be much harder. So you're right, James, that it is harder to learn how to be neutral. It is a huge mindset, but that wasn't where I was coming from to begin with.
I was definitely the either or. And I still believe that when there is domestic violence, we do need to look at things from the point of view of the victim, because it's a safety issue and because mediation won't work with domestic violence cases anyway. So I think it's a totally different types of cases. But when there is no domestic violence, I would say I felt very much like Joy, like you're talking about people who have to learn to be neutral. I had to learn it. I was very afraid of, because I had represented so many women over the course of my 18 years, that I was not going to be open or towards the men in the mediation, for instance. That was a big worry of mine for quite a while. And it took me a while to be more neutral. We have to forget this idea of neutrality, like we're all completely neutral. We have our unconscious and conscious biases, and we have to work on them. And this is where the CUC trainings are also fabulous, because there is, the learning of the process and how to mediate and all of that external stuff, but there's also all of our internal beliefs, judgments, preferences. We are human beings. We have judgments, and we need to work on that all the time. I still work on it today, and this is where CUC does a lot of inside work, which is helpful.
This podcast is supported by our CUC Connect members, whose yearly membership includes free attendance to our live monthly webinars, 12 additional featured recordings of past training events, and support from our network of certified trainers for continued professional development. Consider joining CUC Connect today and dive deeper into the understanding-based model. So, final question that I have for both of you, Antoinette and Joy, is what advice do you have for attorneys? And I know that we've talked about how these skills can be useful for many others, therapists, those working as advocates and community organizations. But since you're both attorneys and this training that you're doing in June has really been designed to be helpful to attorneys in New York, what advice would you have for them who may be considering taking the mediation training? And what are some reasons they should join you in June?
CUC's approach is very thorough and very intentional and thoughtful. And the approach to being neutral is understanding that we're all human beings and we have opinions and thoughts and biases, and and deals with them and approaches them. And I think that, and we don't pretend that we don't have that. So I think that's unique. The other thing I was thinking earlier was when Antoinette was talking about other professionals taking this to learn divorce law, which, as I said, I had to do. And I took a class on divorce law, New York divorce law with CUC when I first started, but it hasn't been offered on the East Coast for years and years. So this is a really unique opportunity. In terms of other lawyers who want to learn how to be mediators, I think it's really good to learn the skills. It enhances negotiation skills. It makes you be a better lawyer, whether you decide to become a mediator or not. It opens up the possibility of becoming a mediator and allows you to try mediation and also to participate or allow you to understand mediation better so that when it's appropriate for your clients, they can mediate and you can support them in their mediation.
And I also will say that I find that mediation, learning how to mediate, is really effective if you are in person and you're doing it in an intensive way. Because a lot of the work is role plays and doing it for a couple of hours every day, a couple of days in a row is by far the most efficient way to learn mediation so that you can really you can have it in your bones. You will feel it. You have to have that constant role play work to really absorb it in a way that is way more efficient than taking them online or over the course of many months. So I think it's just time and effort that pays off in really a very short time.
Well, Antoinette and Joy, thank you both for sharing your insights today and for your dedication to making mediation and conflict resolution more accessible to those in the legal practice and to those who are looking for alternatives to the legal system. Thank you both.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James. This is fun.
Antoinette Delruelle is a mediator and attorney who leads mediation training and initiatives at NILAC, and Joy Rosenthal is a mediator and collaborative lawyer helping families navigate conflict with compassion. If you'd like to learn more about mediation training with the Center for Understanding in Conflict, visit www.understandinginconflict.org. Thank you to today's guests for being with us today and to our CUC Connect members whose support enables the Center for Understanding in Conflict to bring new perspectives in the field of conflict resolution and mediation to you, our listener, in each new episode. You can find out more about today's episode, along with full interviews and additional information about conflict resolution and mediation using the understanding-based model at www.understandinginconflict.org.